This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate fourth and final part of What If Kid Naruto Was Raised by a Legendary Monk. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Now, wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Naruto knew that this was a serious moment even though he had no idea what was happening. Kneeling in front of two elderly men in the main hall. One was his grandfather, the other an eccentric older man dressed flamboyantly and with long red hair. He was familiar enough with the man to identify him as Jiraiya, or Pervy Sage, as he refers to him so lovingly. Being under both men's intense gaze was uncomfortable. He wanted to wriggle but had to control himself. It felt like they were dissecting him, testing him to see if he was prepared for something. Attracting the boy's attention, Karasu said, "Naruto, as you already know, Jiraiya. Dono will be taking you under his wings for the next month." The monk turned to Jiraiya, who nodded, and said, "We both knew that this day would come sooner or later, but when you were a hatchling, we came to an agreement. The agreement was that once you became an official ninja, that you would become my apprentice," Jiraiya said, turning to face Naruto. Naruto wanted to respond, but his grandfather's look cut him down. "This would have no effect on your team whatsoever. It's really just me being a selfish old man who wants to give his godson some extra training on the side. Before we begin, however, there is something that you must do. A test, if you will, to see if you are truly prepared for my teachings. I know that Karasu Dono has taught you much over the years and know that you are quite skilled, but this test will see just how well you can put those skills into action. You accomplish this, I will make you worthy of that promotion." Naruto straightened up and asked, "What must I do?" He quickly regretted saying that after noticing the playful expressions on the older men's faces. Sakura was merely doing as her sensei had instructed her that morning, apologizing for not being able to train her this month, and she had no idea how to feel. Yes, she realized why, particularly in light of Orochimaru's previous attack on Sasuke, which left a mark on his neck. She is baffled as to why he sent her to the insane Kunoichi who gave out the second test in the forest, though. Anko questioned, "What do you want, brat?" Sakura squirmed under the Jonin's glare. Examining the Jonin's displeased demeanor, she couldn't help but observe that, judging from her dark blue sleep pants and black tank top, the older woman had just woken up. She also noticed that she was glaring at him. The genin bowed low to Anko. "Sensei," and stammered, "I'm sorry, but Kakashi. Sensei told me that I would find the person who was to be my sensei for the month here." The sound of the Jonin clicking her tongue made her freeze. "I'm sorry, he told me that I would find my sensei here." "Did Kakashi tell you who it is?" She stood up straight and shook her head. "No, just that I would find my arranged sensei here." When she saw the Jonin face palm herself, she recoiled. Anko said, "Lucky for you, I was there when it was arranged," and she motioned for Sakura to follow her as she left her apartment. "Who is it?" Anko practically growled, telling the genin that she was still very obviously upset about waking up. "You'll see in a moment," Anko said. They walked down the hall a short distance before coming to a stop outside the apartment next to the Jonin's. She felt foolish for passing this one and blinked a few times, but she was instructed to go to the apartment with the older Kunoichi. Sakura watched the Jonin closely, a little uncomfortable at the frown on the older woman's face. The Jonin started pounding on the door, and she almost leapt away. "Hey asshole, get up," she yelled after hitting it a few more times without getting a response. The genin said, "Maybe they're not home," and only winced when the Jonin turned her gaze back to her. The door opened for them, surprising Sakura as Anko entered, and she turned back to face the door, running her hand over the knob and saying, "The asshole is home." Glancing back, Sakura was certain that the woman's bewildered expression was what the Jonin saw when she appeared stunned. "What? You just picked his lock?" The Jonin shot the genin another angry look and pointed at herself, proclaiming, "I'm a ninja." Then she continued into the apartment, yelling at him again. From what Sakura assumed to be the apartment's back bedroom, she heard a kind of grumbling reply. The older woman surprised Sakura even more when she took a book off a shelf and settled down on the couch, saying, "Get your ass out here and meet your student." She was so startled by the woman's rudeness that she nearly missed the other person entering the living room. "Good morning," the newcomer said, clearly recognizing the man as Naruto's cousin from her few prior encounters with him. She was taken aback by his appearance when he emerged wearing gray lounge pants and a light blue shirt, holding a teddy bear. Disregarding Sakura's startled appearance and Anko's pensive expression, Jado reached over to take a chair from the kitchen table and set it in front of the couch that Anko was relaxing on. He motioned for the girl to take a seat next to the Jonin after he had settled into the chair and placed the stuffed animal on his lap. Since he was meant to prepare her for the next and last exam round, she saw no harm in doing as he asked for the time being. However, she couldn't help but feel a little uneasy as she sat there in the light of the man's dead, gazing eyes and the Jonin's lack of interest next to her. But all the while, her gaze kept going to the bear. He emerged with it in his hands from what she can only surmise is the bedroom, so what did that signify? The man in front of her said, "So you're Kakashi's student?" It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyhow. She was about to say something. "Before we officially begin today, I'd like you to answer a few questions and then you can ask me a few questions. Is this fine?" Yes, sensei." He smiled and nodded. "Okay, what is your name?" That confused her, as did the Jonin standing next to her. If nothing else, they would have assumed that he was familiar with her name for this training. Haruno Sakura. Now what are your likes, dislikes, hobbies, and dreams for the future? Her Jonin sensei, Hitaki Kakashi, had asked her and her team these very same questions when they had first started their careers, and she blinked a few times in memory. "Well, what I like isn't a thing but she started, obviously knowing the answers already, but she winced before she could say anything more that the two adults saw. It surprised her that it came out naturally for her to say, "I also like both my teammate Naruto and that little creature that was with him, Slime." She wasn't even sure why she said it. After saying that, "I don't know what I don't like anymore, but I do like to read a lot." The man grinned and gestured to something behind him, causing her to look past him. Her eyes grew wide as she saw the enormous bookshelf filled to the brim with books, most of which she could not understand because they were written in foreign languages. "Did you read them all?" Sakura looked at him blankly after the question. She had no idea what it was anymore, but her head started to throb. The man nodded. "Yes, I've read each of them over a few times by now with the exception of Spencer's, The Fairy Queen. That one is just a pain in the ass to read through entirely at least once." "I see. Well then I only have a few more questions for you. Who was the first ninja?" The innocent question caused her eyes to widen. She was taught this back in the academy, so she knew it like the back of her hand. "That's easy, it was the Rakudo Sennin." "Who the hell is that?" Sakura was taken aback by that, and Anko looked up from her book, paused. "He is the one who introduced ninjutsu to the world." Sakura heard Anko remark, "Jado, this is something that everyone knows unless they were living under a rock," as she shut the book and squeezed the bridge of her nose. "He's the guy who started the ninja world and defeated the Jubi. He was also said to possess the legendary Rinnegan." Sakura watched the man in front of her closely, noting how he now appeared to understand what they were discussing. Then he said, "Well, that is wrong. She wasn't the first. The first were a bunch of peasants who learned martial arts to fight. They became assassins, spies, thieves, scouts, anything and everything that you do today. They came before Pimiko. Sama tried to spread her teachings." He then laughed. "It's kind of funny how she was elevated to godhood when she didn't actually ascend." Sakura heard Anko murmur, "Pimiko," and then the older woman stood up and moved to the desk by the shelf. "Now then, can you tell me what a ninja really is these days?" "We are warriors," the genin replied with haste. "We are the protectors of our village and the will of fire." When Jado nodded, he frowned. "To tell the truth, you are more like shaman warriors with a preference for stealth-based skills. Think of it this way. You can perform techniques with your chakra and those techniques take on a supernatural quality despite how natural they are." She can appreciate that, but it goes against what the academy taught. She looked confused and shook her head, not knowing how to respond to the question. "Now then, are you of noble blood?" He simply seemed to grin and rub his hands together at that. "Excellent. This will be more fun than I expected. Okay, just one last question before it's your turn. What clan do you belong to?" That one was simple. She blinked. "The Haruno clan." "Wrong. What, but I'm part of that clan." "That is your family, not your clan." Anko said. "Jado, she has you there though," as he searched through some of the books on the desk for something. He grinned and turned to face the genin, saying, "No, she doesn't. You have 1 month to figure this out. You figure it out and I'll get you a gift." Curious about the man in front of her, Sakura inquired, "What clan do you belong to, sensei?" For a few fleeting moments, he appeared thoughtful, but then grinned and clapped his hands, saying, "They're gone and all I have left is my family. All right, now it's your turn." Sensei, I'm sorry but I never got your name? Really, he said, blinking a couple of times before posing with a playful twinkle in his eyes. He puffed out his chest and concluded his pose. Why I am the Asura, the most holy sage of chaos. I am Jado. The two women in the room looked at him as if he was crazy. This, however, was short-lived as Anko struck the back of his head with an unexpected appearance behind him. She muttered, "Idiot," and moved toward the door. Jado, I'm heading back with this book. Do you mind if we meet up later? There are a few things that I'd like to discuss with you. The man nodded while cradling his head. Sakura was left alone with the strange man after the Jonin said, "Sure, I'll find you later then." Now then onto your other questions, Sakura exclaimed. After a brief awkward moment caused by the man's introduction and Anko's response, the genin asked, "What do you like?" All he seemed to do was rub his hands together and smile. "Oh, this is an easy one. I like my family, reading, fighting, miso ramen and my art." "What kinds of art do you do?" He smiled broadly and said, "Why is Sakura's art the best of them all?" She was dumbfounded, but he continued, "Nothing is better than the art of war. It is so beautiful when opposing forces clash, with their beliefs and ideals on the line." She blinked as she said, "What I don't like is the 3-minute wait after I pour in the boiling water." It was precisely what Naruto had said a few months prior during the team introductions. "What I really dislike though is genocide and my colleagues. My hobbies, well they are part of my likes, and my dreams for the future? Well I'll tell you some other time." Sakura asked, "Jado. Sensei, will you be teaching me things that Naruto knows?" And couldn't help but glance down at her hands in response. It didn't hurt to ask him, just to be sure she knew what to expect from him, since she knew this man was her teammate's cousin. There was silence for a few moments, and then she dared to look up, meeting the man's cold, analytical gaze as he studied her, and she felt herself squirm beneath his dead eyes. He got up again and put the stuffed animal back on his chair. "I do know what he knows and more," he said. Taking her hands, he said, "But what he knows took him years of training from Gramps. Right now as you are, you wouldn't be able to meet his level for a couple of years because of the blood and sweat he poured into his own training. Now I'm not saying that he's superior or anything, well he is, but you can meet him or exceed him someday. I'm just going to give you a push in the right direction. Though before we begin any physical training, we'll be studying and letting our bodies rest." He then released her hands and they suddenly felt extremely chilly. "Before that however, I'd like to check something first, so just relax and tell me if you feel anything okay?" Her eyes met his and she nodded. "Yes, sensei." He grinned and put both of his hands on either side of her head, as though he was searching for something strange. Sakura winced, indicating that he had discovered what he had been searching for. "Sakura, this is one nasty bruise you got here," he said, turning her head to look at it more closely. "Do you remember how you got it?" The man brushed her hair aside and prodded her bruised head before saying, "It might have happened during my fight with Ino.Pig. It took her a moment to say that." He released her but knelt in front of her, saying, "It looks older than that." She lost track of what he had said as her mind wandered back to the forest. "You probably got it inside the forest." She winced in pain once more as she tried to recollect her memories of what happened in there, but as she did so, something came smashing to the forefront of her thoughts. "Is everything okay, Sakura?" the kunoichi asked, cradling her head before turning to face her new sensei and expressing concern. She straightened up a little and took a few minutes to gather her thoughts. She raised her hand to her head again and winced as pain flared as she tried to retrieve more memories. Jado. Sensei, I can't remember most of the forest. I only remember the first day, our fight with Orochimaru, and then when I was taking care of Sasuke before I was attacked by the genin from Odogakure no Sato. After that, I only remember the last day when we met up with Naruto again." After giving what she said some thought, the man leaned back and scowled. "I think I know what happened, but before I say anything on the matter, I think we should at least pay a visit to the hospital." The young child asked, "Why sensei?" "I feel fine," blinking in confusion. The man interrupted her before she could finish. He got up and strode across the kitchen area, projecting an air of importance. "You may feel fine, but after the trials you've been through, it's better safe than sorry." She had eaten breakfast before coming over, but she couldn't help but be excited for what was about to happen, especially when he vanished behind a counter. As per the custom of master and disciple, even one as temporary as ours may be, we shall partake of the one meal that even my boss, Big C, cannot refuse. However, this quickly collapsed when he reappeared holding two packages that appeared to be very familiar. "We'll be having ramen." The girl was somewhat dejected, but she also noticed, strangely, how much her new sensei resembled Naruto, even though he was a crazy guy who loved fighting. Naruto couldn't help but wonder if he was in heaven or hell because it was much past midday. Despite his strong objections, he found the test enjoyable, a fact he will never share with Hinata, his closest friend. It was exactly the same type of test that pervy Sage would administer to him. He was tasked by the more experienced shinobi with breaking into Konoha hot springs to obtain intelligence. It was a true test of his abilities to accomplish this without being noticed and then apprehended. He had to install motion activated cameras in the changing room and the bathing area as part of his information gathering task for the test. The foolish white-haired man told him that the cameras would only take a few pictures if something moved in front of them and that each camera had enough film in it to take several hundred. After putting those in place, he started to leave. However, he had to grab something from the changing room first. It was quite close when Ino appeared and nearly recognized him, even though he had no idea why his grandparents and uncle wanted him to accept what they were asking for. Nearly being the operative word there, as he was changed into his unique technique, the Oiroke no Jutsu, which he was lucky enough to have never seen her use before. Even though the way he was acting in the room and his whiskers almost gave him away, it was just the two of them. Being the bossy type of girl that she is, she questioned Naruto about his strange behavior in front of her, and he eventually responded by pointing out that she was only wearing a towel and that he liked girls. She left him alone, understanding his situation and feeling a little uncomfortable at the moment. After finding what he was looking for, he ran back to his house by himself and discovered his grandfather and uncle sipping tea on the front steps. When he realized this, he threw the items he had stolen at the wise man, who skillfully caught them. As he examined the article in front of him, Jiraiya exclaimed, "Excellent, I knew you would succeed," sporting an odd smile. "Oh ho, what a beautiful silky darling this one is." Karasu. "Dono, what do you think it is?" "I'm guessing D.Cup." Karasu studied the black brazier in the sage's hands, matching the expression of the younger man. "I do think that you are right, Jiraiya. Dono. That is indeed a D.Cup, he said, cupping his chin. Jiraiya passed the silky black bra to Karasu, who had a strange glint in his eyes, while she giggled like a schoolgirl over it. The sage then got up and beckoned Naruto to follow him, saying, "Now that is out of the way, let's begin your training." When Naruto realized this, he waved his grandfather off and followed the shinobi. He wanted to talk to him about a lot of things right then and there, but he turned his head away when he saw the older man's gloomy expression. But as soon as he did, he sensed a hand on his shoulder. Glancing up now, he noticed the usually eccentric shinobi grinning gently. They walked in silence for quite some time before coming across a stream near the village's edge. Jiraiya bit his thumb and made a few hand seals, saying, "This will do." As the sage slammed his palm into the ground, Naruto saw what the man was about to do and took a step back. "Before we begin, however, there is one last thing that you have to do," Jiraiya exclaimed. "Kachiyose no Jutsu." As she appeared in a cloud of smoke perched atop a toad that was clutching a big scroll. After unrolling its tongue, the toad placed the scroll in front of Naruto. When he unrolled the prompt that the toad and his uncle had given him, he saw many names written on it, the two most prominent being Namikaze Minato and Sakai Jiraiya. The Yondaime Hokage's name was surrounded by one blank space. He turned to face his uncle with curiosity and asked him in a quiet voice what this was all about. He grinned at the boy and said, "What you have before you is the toad summoning contract that has been passed down for generations. Write your name down and press all 5 fingers into it below. This is part of your apprenticeship with me. You will be required to sign that contract with your blood." Jiraiya nodded to himself as he watched the boy follow instructions. When the toad realized he was finished, it shot its tongue, grabbed the scroll, and vanished in a puff of smoke. "Good, now that is done. Let me explain exactly what this contract entails. First of all, you will now be able to summon toads anytime you may need their help, and they come in all shapes and sizes as well. The more powerful that they are, the more chakra that it'll be needed to summon them. Now follow my hands. Good, now try this yourself." One more toad appeared in a burst of smoke, but it was much smaller than the previous one. Naruto nodded, went through the hand signs again, and then slammed his hand down on the ground and yelled, "Kachiyose no Jutsu." Beneath his hand, A tiny orange toad with a dark blue jacket materialized. The toad glared up at Naruto. "Yo kid, if you wanna play with me, you're gonna have to have some munchies." For a few moments, Naruto kept his distance from the small frog, trying not to twitch, until his uncle's soft laugh broke the tension. "What's so funny, pervy sage?" When Jiraiya realized he was caught, he composed himself and knelt down beside the two. Observing the boy's puzzled expression, he clarified, "You of course, but who would have known you'd be able to summon Gamakichi on your first try?" Though the Yondaime was able to summon Gama on his first go, the older shinobi couldn't help but pause after witnessing the genin freeze up. "The toad that was just here. Anyway, seeing that you can summon on your own, I think that it's time we moved on to the real part of the training. As I've been told by Karasu. Dono, you are aware of Kyuubi being sealed within you. What's wrong?" After a few awkward moments that both the young toad and the sage couldn't help but feel uncomfortable in, Naruto finally answered. He replied simply, "I hate it. It's so full of hate that the mere touch of its power can change how I am. When I last used it, its chakra was full of rage and hatred, but when it was aimed at a person, it wanted to utterly destroy that person. I may have hated that person as well, but when its power came to the forefront, I wasn't entirely in control. I refused to use its power." Jiraiya calmly let the boy vent, giving him space to express himself. Naruto was shocked by this and became even more rigid. "That is why you must be trained in using its power. You may not like it, but neither did your mother. Yes, your mother, Kushina, was the last Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. Did she like it? Well, not at first, but she did learn how to control it to not affect her. That is what we will be covering. It may seem odd that I'm doing this with you instead of Karasu. Dono. But he has less experience with Biju, with him only keeping tabs on where they are. At least with me, I'll be able to help you control it." His mind was filled with a plethora of questions, all of which he desperately wanted answered, but the most pressing one concerned his mother. The last person to possess the Kyuubi no Yoko was his mother, right? Why hadn't anyone told him that earlier? If it couldn't be, how come his grandfather didn't inform him of that? He couldn't have thought of doing that either, since his grandfather had problems bringing up the subject of him being the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi previously. It was still a difficult topic to broach. Although he was pleased to learn more about his mother, the Kyuubi was in her final days. He asked, ignoring most of what his uncle was saying, "How did it escape her?" Without breaking, Jiraiya clarified, "It broke free somehow during your birth. We don't know how it happened, we just know it did. There are a few theories as to what happened, but what I can tell you about the circumstances pertaining to its release was that the seal holding back the Kyuubi was at its weakest. Don't look too much into it being so from child birth." "How do you know that? What from child birth?" "Yes. Well, you're the third Jinchuriki for the Kyuubi. The first one was Uzumaki Mito, the wife of the Shodem Hokage. The Kyuubi has been with us since the battle at the Valley of the End, where the Shodem Hokage faced off against Uchiha Madara, who had Kyuubi under his control. Mito Sama used her abilities in Fuin Jutsu to seal the Kyuubi inside herself, and since then it's been a tool for Konoha." He felt the cogs in his mind turning as he exclaimed, "You mean that I'm nothing more than some weapon to be used?" Though it was leading somewhere, he wasn't making an effort to understand anything. Jiraiya put both of his hands on the boy's shoulders and met his eyes, seeing how offended the boy was. "You are more than some weapon. You are my god, child who I love. What we are doing is for both your own protection and the safety of those you care about. If you can control the Kyuubi, then you can better protect your friends and family. Sure, in the past Kyuubi was used as a deterrent to war, but you won't be it. Konoha has plenty of strong ninja like me and Sarutobi Sensei around to make sure that you don't have to worry about a war." He ended by pointing to himself using his thumb. After saying, "We have the guts needed to not rely on the Kyuubi," Naruto felt a little more upbeat and chose to go on. "Okay, first up, meditation. We're gonna have you find your core and then see if you can call upon the fox." Taking that as a sign, Naruto took a few backward steps and sat down in the lotus position that his grandfather had taught him. But as he did, slime materialized right in front of him, leapt off, and proceeded to approach the toad. He was surprised, as was Jiraiya, when the two started to play. He ignored it and started meditating, not really realizing that his uncle was meditating next to him. Soon after, he felt at ease with who he was and made the decision to look within for the first time. Previously, he had only ever meditated as a kind of relaxation that his grandfather had taught him. The world outside him started to fade away as he looked within for his core. If his assessment of the corridor's design and the ankle deep water were correct, his next realization was that he was in some sort of sewer. Though he was unsure of his exact location, he believed he might be close to his core. Should he be correct in his assessment, the pipes could represent the spirals through which his chakra moves throughout his body. He felt a tug toward one of the hallways that shot off from the main corridor as he looked around. He sensed a breeze coming from it as he approached, so he went inside. As he went deeper inside, he found himself in a huge chamber that was closed by a paper talisman and had a large gate. Must be one of the 8 gates, but what's with the breeze? It's like someone is breathing, he thought as he resolved to investigate. Suddenly, the breeze stopped. Naruto saw a single fiery red eye that had to be bigger than him as he peered deeper into the shadows beyond the gate's bars. "So you've arrived at last," the being outside the gate said. Its voice was full of pure hatred. "Come closer so that I may see you better." Even though Naruto knew what was behind those bars, he felt obliged to comply in order to get a closer look at the creature there. Something abruptly jumped onto his back as he got closer to it. Even though it was only in his dreams, the voice sounded very familiar to him. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," it said. He turned his head slightly to the side and saw the naughty looking muzzle of that black furred kitsune that had repeatedly shown up in his dreams a few weeks prior. He turned to face the fox again and noticed its purple eye resting on his shoulder. He isn't a very happy person and would like to do nothing more than to devour you. The creature beyond roared, "Kato, you bastard," as it attempted to stab a clawed hand through the gate's bars. The two on the other side of the gate were too far away from him to attack, so it was pointless. "How dare you do this to me, to a fellow beast?" The now identified kitsune, Kato, waved his tail like a finger and said, "K.Han, you should know better than that. You know of the blood pact that my kind has made with that line, do you not? You may have killed one of his descendants, but he won't like it if you killed this one as well. He knows that you did as well, though he can understand with the circumstances as they were." The creature called K.Han growled as it moved its head closer to the gate, exposing the enormous head of a red furred fox. "So he's just going to let me rot inside of this foul human then," the creature said. At that moment, the Kyuubi made the decision to reveal themselves to Naruto. The boy sensed the Biju's hatred radiating from him. He knows nothing of what truly happened that night. "So why don't you just tell him then, Kato exclaimed, springing off of Naruto's shoulder and landing in front of him. When he landed though, he grew to the size of a horse. "You know that he still loves you and is very understanding? Then tell him to free me from this human so that we may talk." "He can't do that, but you can tell either me of Dradao Sama and we'd be sure to tell him," Kato calmly explained before the Kyuubi. Naruto felt very small in comparison to the two creatures in front of him at that moment. "Though let's continue this later once the boy is gone. He is here for a reason after all," he said. He paused when he saw the strange kitsune, Kato, in front of him, its curious gaze causing him to feel almost choked by the pure hatred radiating from the Kyuubi. Kyuubi roared, "What is it that you want, human?" Naruto flinched, barely managing to contain himself as he met the formidable demon's eyes. "What is it that you want to grace me with your presence?" He felt so small and lost his nerve before the Kyuubi that, if Kato hadn't been giving him a strangely comforting smile, he would have almost taken a step back. "Hey Fox, you've been living in my body since I was born. We're stuck together whether we like it or not, we'll need to work together from time to time. So I'll need your help when I need it." At last, he responded with a glare of his own. The Kyuubi was oddly quiet as it digested what had been said. It growled, "You humans are all the same," and turned its back on Naruto. After saying, "Leave my sight now before my ire grows human," a red chakra tendril shot out of the gate and struck Naruto, forcing him out of the room. Kato lingered behind for a while and couldn't help but wonder, was that really necessary, K.Han? He then left the room as well, realizing that the Kyuubi would not respond. Everyone except for Father and Pimiko. "Sama is the same," the Kyuubi muttered in disdain when they noticed that nobody else was present. When Naruto awoke from his trance, he could feel strength coursing through his body. When he opened his eyes, he saw Jiraiya sitting in front of him, his features glowing with pride. His focus narrowed and he saw that Slime and Gamakichi were sitting atop the sage's shoulders, expressions of wonder on their own faces. "Nice work, kid. Try using the jutsu now," Jiraiya gave the boy an order as he stood up and moved away from him. With a nod, he stood up too and performed the hand signals, noting the reddish aura surrounding his body as he forcefully hit the ground with his hand. He bellowed, "Kachiyose no Jutsu," just as a thick cloud of smoke billowed over the scene. Before Naruto realized what had happened, he found himself perched atop the head of a massive red-skinned toad that was puffing on a pipe. Glancing around, he saw that the toad had on a coat that resembled Gamakichi's. Nevertheless, he missed that since he was so happy about using the jutsu to succeed, he jumped around a little until a huge tongue encircled him. The toad brought the boy in front of its eyes and glared at him, growling, "You brat, what the hell do you think you're doing? Why the hell are you running around on my head? I'm trying to enjoy the fresh air and the scenery, and there you are doing your own stupid thing on my head. Now why don't you tell me where that lecherous lout, Jiraiya, is? Seriously, the nerve of that man, summoning me and placing a stupid brat on my head as well." Despite his situation, Naruto yelled back at the toad, feeling his own rage rising, especially after being talked down to by the Kyuubi and now this new one. "Hey you stupid toad, pervy sage didn't summon you, I did." In a fit of laughter, the toad let out, "You shouldn't lie. There is no way that a brat like you could have summoned the likes of me." Naruto was really pushed over the edge by that. "Shut up you stupid toad, let me go now. I summoned you so you have to listen to me, Datbeo. Who the hell do you think you're talking to, brat? How dare you, a brat who can't exchange sake, declare yourself the boss of me, Gamabunta, the chief of the toads? Do you want me to kill you?" The toad glared back at Naruto. "It's not like I haven't exchanged sake with you before, you stupid toad," Naruto growled, sensing the toad's lack of confidence. He had done it many times before with his grandfather, albeit mostly in private. Besides, it's not like his grandfather gave a damn about the legal drinking age. With a puff of smoke, Gamabunta said, "Oh really, then I'll be waiting. If you do so then I'll let you summon me," and dropped Naruto. Had Jiraiya not been quick on the uptake and caught him before he hit the ground, that would have hurt him. But Naruto was in the arms of blissful unconsciousness before he even realized he was in Jiraiya's arms. The strain of the summoning plus the unexpected fear was simply too much for him at that moment. Standing on the top of the Hokage Tower, Sarutobi Hiruzen couldn't help but watch over the visitors who were arriving in his village today. On this momentous day, 10 young genin, whose aspirations and lives are at stake for the honor of their own villages, took part in the Chunin selection exam finals. With Rado and Anko at his sides, he stood motionless on the tower while the cart containing Sanagakure no Sato's cage passed through the gates. Seeing that his counter part in from K's no Kuni is checking in along with the 2 representatives from the order, one of his eyebrows curiously rose. Finally, he said, "So it begins," turning to leave the tower and head toward the stadium where the Chunin selection exam's main event will take place. "Come, it wouldn't look well to have our guests waiting for us in our own home." Naruto was thinking back on the previous month as he strolled through the busy village streets. He gained new knowledge and improved a few skills throughout the course of the month, in addition to learning some shocking facts about Kyuubi no Yoko. Even though he was glad to have more information about his mother, he was unhappy at the idea of the great and terrible Kyuubi being imprisoned ever since the village's founding. He can see why the Biju has such animosity toward humanity because, in the few times he had a face encounter with the Kyuubi, it was a demon, or beast, as it preferred to be called. Its prolonged use as a tool and imprisonment inside a Jinchuriki would account for its intense animosity toward him. His grandfather said that the village is the source of the Kyuubi problem, so he didn't have much to say on the subject. Jado was also of little assistance, stating that despite the Kyuubi's hatred and attachment to him, he ought to show some decency to the fox. In addition, he advised not to depend solely on the Kyuubi's strength and to supplement it with his own if necessary. He was a little taken aback by that, but he ignored it. However, additional questions surfaced after the revelations. He knew that the black-furred kitsune wasn't just him seeing things, it was truly real. Jado told him that it wouldn't bother him and it really hasn't aside from going over things in his dreams. It was weird because in the dreams, Naruto was just going through the motions that Kato told him to go through and he couldn't actually talk to him at all. The only time he was able to communicate with him was when he initially met with the Kyuubi. However, his cousin was questioned after that meeting and would easily sidestep them. He was so engrossed in his thoughts that he nearly failed to arrive at the Hyuga clan's compound. Fortunately, he was broken from his thoughts by the sight of his best friend, Hinata, who was released from the hospital as of yesterday. He couldn't help but feel happy at seeing her walking about, but the sight of the bandages wrapped around her forearms darkened his mood. It reminded him of exactly who put her in the hospital in the first place and what he intends to do to the person later that day. Walking up to her, he couldn't help but take in her appearance. Aside from the bandages, he felt that light blue blouse looked good on her. When he eventually made it to Hinata Chan, he asked, "How ya doing?" The kunoichi was a little taken aback but grinned nonetheless. She said, "I'm doing fine, Naruto.kun," before deciding to finally admit her confusion. Naruto.kun. Did something happen with Karasu Sama? He raised an eyebrow, suddenly feeling perplexed himself. He didn't think anything significant had happened between him and his grandfather. Although the elderly man appeared somewhat anxious due to the upcoming arrivals from the order and his concerns about his personal safety during the competition, he was going to be alright. He was completely confident in his skills and certain that he could defeat Sabaku no Gaara. There was no doubt in his thoughts that he was going to face off against the Jinchuriki of the Ichibi. That was going to be a troublesome fight. Seeing that he was once again about to be lost in thought, he shook his head and replied to his best friend, "Everything's fine, Hinata Chan. Why do you ask?" "It's just that you're not wearing your robes. It's not like you don't look good without them, it's just odd. And are you eating something with your hat?" Naruto asked, not understanding why she would turn her head away from him as the scene was coming to an end, but putting it aside when he noticed the slight flush to her cheeks. He surmised that it had to be her condition that he had never discussed with her. Looking down at himself, he didn't know why it was odd to be wearing something else besides his robes. Although he will concede that wearing something other than his robes for the first time felt strange at first, he did so only a week ago at the pervy sage's insistence. He said that the robes weren't ideal for general use as a ninja. When he went back home later that day, for some reason, his grandfather smacked his forehead and commented on how his own personal style easily reflects his cousin's when he was the same age. Naruto simply chose to wear a black t-shirt with an orange vest on top, along with a pair of baggy orange shorts. It wasn't much, really. He didn't know why, but when he visited his cousin, he was relieved to hear that the older man thought he looked fierce, especially with the recently replaced straw hat, which is practically a family trademark. As for his eyes, well, he must have progressed further than he thought in the style his cousin showed him. Pervy Sage said I needed new clothes and Gramps said that I could spread my wings a little, he said as brought his attention back the kunoichi at his side. He lifted his hat off of his head and let it rest on his back, revealing an orange-skinned toad sitting on top of his head and munching on a cookie. They felt a bit weird at first, but now they feel fine. My eyes. Well, I've been doing lots of super hard training, he exclaimed. This here is Gamakichi. I was able to summon him during my training and now we're friends. Yo, the tiny toad uttered after finishing its cookie. He then peered over Naruto's head to look him in the eyes. Hey bro, is this your? Hinata turned her head quickly away, blushing profusely at what the toad was implying, especially since it was smiling and holding out its pinky. But Naruto didn't understand what the toad was saying, so he responded, yes, Hinata Chan is my best friend. To her dismay, the girl nevertheless nodded. The boy could really be that stupid. She greeted the small toad again and started to follow him toward the stadium. I believe you have a chance against Neji. Nissan, she eventually uttered after a little fidget. Naruto couldn't resist laughing at the expense of his friend. Naturally, he had an advantage because he had known the boy since they were young. However, he also knew that the boy was more than capable of handling Rock Lee, the boy he had defeated to go on in the exams, even though he had used no ninjutsu in that fight. He smirked and looked at Hinata. Of course I can beat him, he said at the start. If I wanted to, I could beat him in one move. His expression soon darkened. My will is stronger than his, and I have a better reason to fight than he does. No one is allowed to do to you like he did and get away it. He stopped and looked back as he placed his hat back over on top of Gamakichi, noticing that the girl had stopped and is looking at him with her eyes wide, idly noting that her face was turning redder than before. Are you okay, Hinata Chan? Now it was her turn to wave her head and then move on to the next item. I'm fine. Just be careful, Naruto.kun. Don't let your anger get the best of you. He chuckled amusedly. They were getting close to the stadium soon, and the girl could only shake her head. I won't, Hinata Chan. I'm just going to give him the beating of a lifetime. After reaching the entrance, he left her to head to where the finalists were to enter. However, before he was fully able to leave her, she gave him a quick hug, for good luck. With that she darted off into the stadium, leaving a confused yet happy Chunin. Hopeful alone pondering about what happened. Gamakichi, however, just laughed about it, and the toad would make remarks that the boy couldn't understand when he was questioned. It wasn't too difficult to find the entrance. 2 masked Konoha Anbu guarded it, and after confirming that it was him, they instructed him to follow the signs. The faces of his opponents and teammate Sakura welcomed him as he entered the room that opened up to the arena floor and the stands on the other side of the stadium. The young Kunoichi carried a bow staff and wore the same kind of hat as him, but otherwise she appeared to be wearing almost the same clothes. Since this was their first encounter since the final exam round, it wasn't all that difficult for him to believe that she was being trained by his cousin. He couldn't help but glance at the other finalists as he walked up to her, observing glares directed at him by Neji and the red-headed boy Gaara. Kiba took a whiff of the air and turned away with a sneer, which confused him a little. When Shikamaru first arrived, he appeared uninterested, but Choji and Tenten, Neji's teammate, at least waved at him. The other Suna.nin, the one with the puppet strapped to his back, was the last boy he saw there. He gave Naruto a patronizing glance before turning away. The only one missing was Sasuke, and Naruto couldn't help but feel a bit sheepish at that. It would stand to reason that with being personally trained by Kakashi for the past month that they might be late to even this. He comprehended the rationale behind Kakashi assuming sole responsibility for Sasuke for a month, and he can only surmise that Sakura was similarly trained by his cousin. Naruto can only hope he arrives in time for the match. Even though he is aware of how crucial this is, he can't really imagine Kakashi being late. Even though it would be strange, it's possible that he would be late for his own funeral if he was. Ignoring everyone else, and trying to banish the rising anger from his mere glance over at Neji, he approached Sakura, who was looking out towards the stands. With a greeting of, "Hey," he stood by her side. Turning her head, she saw him and returned the greeting only after taking in his new appearance. "Hey Naruto, how have you been?" she asked as she fully turned towards him. I've been good," he returned with a shrug before summoning 3 cookies. He took one, tucked one under his hat, and slipped one into his shirt. It took him a moment to realize that Sakura was a little confused, but then her prior knowledge of slime helped her to understand. "I've done lots of super training with my uncle, Pervy Sage. It looks like you've done lots of super training too with Jado. Onisan too." With one hand she held her staff behind her, while the other played with the rim of her hat, blushing from the praise. She started, "Well, I wouldn't call it super training," but Naruto cut her off. "Of course it is, just look at you." Looking over her, he could tell that she is much more fit than before, and the way that she is holding herself there with the staff in her hands showed it. "What he did for you was indeed super training." "Well, he did give me a taste of what you went through over the course of the month, but it was focused on a few things." Not really knowing how skilled she was with the weapon, he asked inquiringly, "Like Bojutsu," though it wasn't really a question after seeing it in her hands. The Kunoichi nodded as she met his eyes and held the weapon behind her back now with both hands before her expression turned sour. "He also beat the basics into me." Naruto merely laughed, Shikuho ringing, at that. "Well, Gramps did that to me as well and still does every now and again. If it's one thing that he beaten into my thick skull is that the basics are the most important thing anyone can have." She leaned in closer to the multi-class ninja and lowered her voice to a whisper as she raised a hand to help cover her voice. "Yay, that's what Jado Sensei said too. Though it wasn't all pure physical training. He challenged me mentally as well and had me study this one book he had called The Art of War, by some guy named Sun Tzu. It's really interesting with what is said in the book. I think Jado Sensei lives by it. No offense Naruto, he's a war-loving nut who feels that it's his art." When he heard that, all he could do was smile strangely and rub the back of his head sheepishly. He started to say, "Well, he is a bit weird," but stopped short when the stadium fell silent. Naruto saw why right away as he peered out the window. The Hokage and Kazekage, accompanied by 3 men, stood at attention in the highest stand that overlooked the arena floor. He instantly recognized his grandfather, and even if he didn't know the other 2 men, he knew enough about them to at least identify them on sight. His teammate, clearly perplexed as to who the men in the stand could be to have the distinction of being seated with the cages, asked, "Who are they?" He pointed to his grandfather and said, "They're the elder council within the order." The other two newly identified men wore similar robes to Karasu. That's my grandfather, Karasu no Kami. The man in white is Taribo no Kami. And the man in red is Ajari no Kami. Naruto asked his teammate, are they really important men? As he noticed that she was also glancing at him. They are the men who help Sojobo no Kami, the head of the order, lead the organization. They are literally his right-hand men. Their influence is quite possibly greater than any one Kage. They govern the many branches that pay respects to the deities that fall within their domain, whether it's light, dark, or between. At the end of that, he noticed his teammate's confusion across her face. After introducing the noble children, he couldn't help but wonder why both men were present. You've heard of the noble children before, right? Well, Amaterasu falls under light, Tsukuyomi is between, and Susanoo is dark. Each of them falls under one of those three domains within the pantheon, and it is these men that make sure that the sects that fall under them are running smoothly. Even though they were on par with his grandfather in terms of status, why were they here, of all people, to see him? Why did they deem this of importance to judge him? Wait a minute, Sakura said, looking as if realization dawned on her. If your grandfather has such responsibility, then why does he live in Konoha? That surprised him too. It was an excellent question that he was unable to ignore. He doesn't do much for the order outside of the annual gatherings. When he is expected to oversee an order domain, it is strange. I don't know really, I think it has to do with me. My mom was a kunoichi and he probably just wanted to raise me where she wanted us to live. She turned to face him fully at that, blinking at the boy with an owl's eyes. Shock written clearly across her face. It was quite a bit of personal information on his family that he just shared with her, and he couldn't blame her for that. Hell, most people only hear the name of the organization and just know that it deals with the various religious sects scattered across the continent. She was just given a crash course on bare basis of how the order runs. It was sure leaving her stumped for a bit. He had a question of his own, so he didn't let her go for too long. Sakura, where is Sasuke? Hearing the question, she shook her head to break out of her daze and looked ready to speak with an odd look in her eye. However, it wasn't to be. The Hokage commanded all to pay attention. Following the Hokage into the Lord's box, Anko did not know what to think of the situation. Karasu and Jado were already there, waiting for them. The elder of the two was seated in one of the 5 seats reserved for the Kages and the elders. His grandson, of course, was sitting on the railing, looking out over the arena floor. Such a sight left her speechless at the blatant disregard for protocol that all guards are expected to show. Just as the Hokage let it go, she allowed it to pass. Finally recognizing them as they approached, Karasu stood while Jado flipped back over. Well, finally decided to show up Hiruzen. Dono, Karasu said as he gave the Hokage a bow, which was soon followed by Jado, who seemed to be sharing in the mass excitement of the tournament. My grandson here was getting a bit antsy waiting here. Shut it, you old bird, Jado smirked in response. I just can't wait to see how the kid does along with Sakura-chan. Chuckling, Hiruzen gave his friend a bow, which was followed by both Anko and Rado. It is good to see you as well. We were just looking over the gate, watching the guests enter. Though I am curious, what kind of men are both Ajari and Taribo? Jado moved to the monk's side as he took a seat. Seeing this, Hiruzen took the center seat, right next to the monk, and both Anko and Rado stood at his sides. Well, they are like me, the monk answered while looking at the Kage right in the eyes. Whatever he was implicating was lost to her, though she guessed that it had to do with his position in the order. Though are both more strict in their responsibilities than I am. Taribo, as per being of the light faction and taking over the position of elder for Sojobo once he became Grand Elder, is a young hot-headed man who feels that everything should be managed. Nothing running unaccounted for or against protocol. He doesn't care much for me or the dark faction in general. Ajari, well, he's a young one too, not as hot-headed as Taribo, but he's a sharp one. He is pretty wise too, was nominated for Grand Elder years ago, but was passed over for Sojobo when I wouldn't take it up. Anko interrupted, much to the amusement of both old men, saying, wait, you were in the running for being the big honcho of the order. Scratching his long nose, Karasu chuckled. Well, I didn't want it, it was too much trouble, and being in charge of it really would have gone against my lord's teachings. Do you remember how I once told you that there were many lands that fell under one of 3 things? The kunoichi nodded, but she noticed the curious expressions on both the Hokage's face as well as Rado's. Well, each land falls under the domain of one of 3 things. Just as the order is broken into 3 domains, the lands fall under the same thing. Actually, the order was set up to follow the domains of the lands. They can either be of the light, dark, or balanced. This land, however, falls under the dark, and so it is my lord's domain. The order was set up years ago as sort of an experiment to see how the others handle being here. So you're saying that the land falls under the divine darkness, Hiruzen stated. What is the difference between these domains? Nothing much besides being created by one or both of the 2 lords, Jado answered for his grandfather. It just means who has precedence over it. Think of them as a daimyo. Being the lord of an area of land, they have control over that area and allow what is to be done there. It is exactly the same thing with the lands. They're either controlled by one or both. With Gramps at the head, it wouldn't have gone well for the original intention of the organization. Well, that's that, but back to my peers, Karasu said, changing the subject back despite how insightful it was into the beliefs of myths behind the teachings of the order. Ajari. Well, he's generally a calm and composed fellow, but he has quite the temper. Also, the last time we met, he was very stressed out over something. The Hokage repeated his question, any idea what that would be? As he tried to come up with a plan for dealing with these men. The monk shrugged and said, could be because I don't run things within my domain like they do. I just tend to supervise and make sure they don't get too out of hand at times. That could be why. Anko mockingly said, he was picking up your slack, to the monk who was at least decent enough to look embarrassed. The divine darkness is very lax with both his children and his domain. I'm sure he is, Hiruzen stated before glancing to the entrance to the box. I'll welcome Kazekage, Dono, Terabo, Dono, and Ajari. Dono. The 3 men, accompanied by their bodyguards, entered the box earlier. The Hokage stood up to greet each man. It is honor for you to be here today and watch this spectacle with us today. Are you tired from the trip here? We are honored that you have welcomed us into your home, Hokage. Dono, the Kazekage said again, matching his counterpart's bow. From what Anko could tell, she couldn't see much of the man as he was covered by either his white and blue robe or the face cloth that only revealed his eyes beneath his hat. Ajari bowed and said, it is truly an honor to be here today and to watch the young hatchlings compete. Anko couldn't see how he could be young. He looked just as old as the Hokage. She could see his head and his matching red eyes that matched both of his robes, unlike the Kazekage. In addition, he was bigger and taller than everyone else. It has always been an interest of mine to see these games, but duties have always kept me away. The 3rd man opted to keep quiet, acting as though such matters were beneath him. Based on what she had recently discovered prior to the arrival of the foreign guests, this may be the case. He certainly looked the part standing in his white robes with that regal air around him. Even though he was offensive, Anko was shocked that the Hokage had allowed it to happen once more. She noticed that all of the dignitaries had bald heads, long noses, and shikuhos that were strikingly similar to Karasu's. She had never met anyone else with a nose like his before, so it was interesting to see it here. She wondered if having a nose like that was required by the order and if rising through the ranks was a ritualistic process. After exchanging pleasantries, all the dignitaries sat down, with the Kazekage sitting directly beside the Hokage. Ajari sat on the other side of Karasu, while Terabo sat next to the Kazekage. As they moved to their seats, she took notice of each of the 4 bodyguards that came in. 2 followed the Kazekage and looked like typical Jonin from Sanagakure no Sato. The other 2 wore hooded cloaks that matched their superiors' robes. Nonetheless, all of them stood motionless at their lord's side, appearing prepared to act at any time. The only ones who seemed relaxed with the tension were both Karasu and Jado. Especially her neighbor, he seemed to be enjoying this a bit too much for her liking, though she did catch him sneaking glances at the guard in red every now and then. Following a brief exchange of small talk regarding the expectations of each man from the Chunin hopefuls, the Hokage got up and moved towards the front of the box. The other Kage and the 3 elders soon joined him. The Chunin hopefuls would emerge onto the arena floor and stand at attention with Genma in front of them in just a few moments. Though there were only 9 standing below, Anko couldn't help but ponder over the lack of a certain Uchiha. She knew that many came today to see him fight, to see the legendary prowess of the Uchiha clan that once proudly stood before. She shook her head of such thoughts, those were in the past and better off there. Though, she did find it curious that the boy was missing now of all days. His sensei, Kakashi, would have undoubtedly arrived on time for once. the masked Jonin is known for being on time for significant gatherings and occasions. Not being here with Sasuke was sure to aggravate the numerous lords and potential clients who were expecting to see the boy perform. There was no word of either shinobi, so they will have to play this carefully just so the guests are not too offended. Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, welcome and many thanks for gathering here today at Konohagore for the Chunin selection examination, the Hokage announced, his voice ringing throughout the stadium. I would like to offer many more thanks for Ajari no Kami, Terabo no Kami, and Konoha's own Karasu no Kami, to take time from their busy schedules within the order as the Elder Council, said men waved at the gathered audience as the people seemed to begin to whisper in hushed, revered tones. And before I speak to the audience, I'd like to thank Kazekage Dono for being with us today as well. He gave the Chunin hopefuls one last glance. Well, without further ado, we will now begin the final round between the 10 candidates who advanced from the preliminaries. So please sit back and enjoy the show. They all returned to their seats after that, but not before the Kazekage remarked, 10? It seems as if one is missing right now, Hokage Dono. You only have 9 down there, Hokage, Terabo said, uttering his first words since coming. Such an orderly event. Now Terabo Dono, Karasu interjected. I'm sure that the lad is merely running late. Nothing to get hung up over. Ajari made the decision to say, I know that this is supposed to be an exam, but he would be penalized for this, would he not? Anko couldn't see any of their faces, but she knew that the Hokage had to be frowning when he nodded his head. That is correct, Ajari Dono. If he is late for his match, it would be considered that he forfeited the match and his chance at being promoted as dictated by the rules set forth for these exams. The red-clad monk leaned forward in his chair and folded his fingers under his chin. That is fascinating, Hokage Dono. So there is a charter in place that all hidden villages as part of your alliance adheres to for these exams? The Hokage nodded. Yes, even though our alliances are nothing more than verbal agreements, the charter is written and adhered to by all participants of the alliance. Any who break from the guidelines are severely penalized by the alliance for negligence. After all, these exams are a substitute for an actual war within a controlled environment where each village can showcase its ninja to potential customers. After giving it some thought, the monk leaned back in his chair. Well, as fascinating as it is, I am definitely looking forward to seeing both Karasu Dono's grandson, the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, fight against Kazekage Dono's son, the Ichibi Jinchuriki. As casual as the comment was spoken, it threw residents of Konoha in a loop as they stared at the monk in shock. Such information about Naruto was highly classified, and even then, Anko was told that the information on the Biju fell under Karasu's responsibility. For this man to know about that and the other boy, it shouldn't have been possible unless he shared the information with his peers, but from looking at Karasu, she couldn't help but believe that he didn't share that with them. It'll be interesting to see how a Jinchuriki raised by Karasu Dono will fare against another. He has the right stuff, Jado suddenly interjected, catching the attentions of every person there. Ajari and especially Terabo were shocked by the blatant breach of protocol by the man speaking out like he did and not directed at the one who he's protecting. He will not fall to the likes of the Ichibi Jinchuriki. The Kazekage entered the conversation with, "Oh, confident are we? Is it because he has a more powerful demon within him that you say that, or is it because he is the grandson of your master?" Jado and Karasu each blinked a few times, then exchanged a glance and did it again. Jado turned back to face the Kazekage and gestured to the arena floor, where Genma, the referee, was explaining the rules to the genin. "Well, we are kin," Jado casually answered, not at all intimidated by the questioning glances sent his way. What reason does either of us need to believe that he will win aside from being family? The Kazekage calmly turned back to the arena floor and said, "Yes, well, either way he'll have to defeat his opponent Hyuga Neji before he can have a chance to face Gaara. Even then, Uchiha Sasuke may in fact beat him if he defeats my son." If the insolent hatchling decides to show up, Terabo sneered as he leaned his elbow. Naruto faced Neji, his opponent, as he stood below on the arena's dirt floor. He may have mellowed a bit after a month, but if he was to be honest with him, there was no way that he was going to let him get away with hurting Hinata like that. She was among the sweetest people Naruto had ever met, if not the sweetest. Seeing Neji's smug face across from him for the first time since they've seen each other a month ago brought his foul mood back. Most likely seeing his foul mood rising, Neji asked with a smirk, "You got something to say, monk?" When Naruto heard this, he clenched his fist in front of the older boy. "Last time we met, you left in a lousy mood after what you did to Hinata-chan, and seeing you again really isn't helping any bastard." The younger boy took pleasure in seeing the smug look change ever so slightly on Neji's face. "I feel as if I hit you at least 100 times that it should make me feel better." He then lowered his head so that his hat covered his eyes. "After all, I did vow on Hinata-chan's blood that you spilt, that I would give you the beating of a lifetime. After all, she is my best friend and it's only right that I return the favor back to you with interest." Seeing that both boys were done, Genma decided to begin the match. Neji assumed his signature fighting stance and said, "I'm not as weak as you may think I am if you truly believe that you can give me a beating of a lifetime. I can't wait to see the despair in your eyes when the truth about losers finally dawns." He didn't get the chance to finish. Naruto was suddenly in his face with his palm open. Before anyone else knew it, Naruto slapped Neji, and the resulting strike sounded as if thunder exploded above. "1. The monk said with a smile as he then backhanded the boy and sending him onto the ground. "2. I'm feeling just a little bit better now." "Lucky shots," Neji muttered, wiping the blood from his lips. Seeing that Naruto was just standing there, leapt at the unprepared boy and stuck the boy's chest with a palm strike, driving chakra into his foe's lungs. A strike that would have felled anyone but the toughest of foes. "How does this feel, loser?" he asked, smirking at the hurt boy. However, as soon as he noticed the smaller boy's smirk, his own smile vanished. Naruto murmured feebly, "You should pay more attention," and vanished in a plume of smoke. Surprised at the sudden disappearance of his opponent, he didn't the movement within the smoke before him. Naruto screamed, 3, as his fist struck Neji in the face. Unlike the previous time, Neji staggered off to the side and was so stunned that he failed to realize Naruto was grabbing hold of his wrist and putting his face in his face. 4, a fresh voice yelled, and through his excruciating vision, Neji could only see the monk raising his hat before an orange blur crashed into his face. With the younger boy holding onto his arm, he couldn't roll with the blow and was held in place. As he turned to face Naruto and lash out at him, Neji only caught a glimpse of yellow eyes under Naruto's hat before it was lowered once more. This action though allowed a blue blur to burst forth from under Naruto's shirt and smash into his face once more. 5. Naruto shouted as slime retreated back into his clothes. And 6. He yanked Neji away and struck the older boy in the face with his fists once more. This time though, he let go of Neji's wrist and let him fall to the ground where he laid there for only a moment. He knew that Neji had no idea as to what had just happened. He never actually broadcasted his knowledge in the skill of using Kage Bunshin. It was just something he knew would be helpful in an emergency. It wasn't something he truly needed. Although he genuinely thinks he can defeat Neji on his own, this also served as a test, forcing him to demonstrate his abilities in other domains. What he did was when the older genin was sprawled out onto the ground, he replaced himself with a clone. After spending some time with his cousin, he learned that shouting the techniques when used doesn't actually help in using them. It would work if he could only remember how to execute the jutsu. That was only partially right. He allowed the clone take a hit for him to catch Neji off guard, which he accomplished with the assistance of Slime and Gamakichi, who both struck the boy before turning to face him again. "Impossible," Neji growled as he flew back onto his feet. "I am the #1 rookie from last year's class. Hailed as the greatest genius of the Hyuga clan in years. How could I have let him catch me like that? Oi bastard, I still owe you 94 more hits," Naruto said, stabbing his Shikuho into the ground, causing it to stand erect. He then took his own stance, one that he learned from his grandfather. Neji flew at Naruto, pulsing veins around his eyes, growling at his actions. His hands flew out, lashing out at the smaller boy as he got closer to Naruto, but each blow was parried and deflected. Then all of a sudden, Neji went flying over Naruto's head when he overextended a strike. Naruto turned around and saw Neji standing with his arms outstretched in a low stance. "You are within field of my divination," Neji stated as he glared at Naruto before launching himself at the monk. Jukano. Hake Rokujuyan Sho. Before Naruto knew what happened himself, Neji repetitively jabbed his fingers into his body and kept spinning around him. As this was going on, he made sure to keep both Gamakichi and Slime safe, so as the swift blows came he did his best to protect his friends. Neji calmly said, 64 palms, after finishing and letting his breath catch. Once he finished saying that, Naruto flew backwards in a delayed reaction. Mr. Referee, it is over. I blocked off each and every tenketsu in his body. He can no longer stand or pose as a threat. Naruto growled and scrambled to balance on his elbows. Fuck that, he said. He heard the haughty boy through the fog of pain and Slime's worries as well as Gamakichi's. There was no way he was going to go down to a few taps like that. He was Uzumaki Naruto, the grandson of Karasu no Kami. The multi-class ninja of Konohagakure no Sato is an assassin without the need for chakra. He doesn't need it, but it makes things easier. It hurt like hell to have all of his points closed, though. I still owe you 90. 4 more hits, you bastard, and what you just did just added to that. With pure strength of will alone, he flipped up onto his 2 feet. Much to both Neji's and the Genma's amazement. I am not going to stop until I pay you back for what you did to Hinata. Chan. Clinging to it, Gamakichi yelled. Yeah, you tell him, bro, from his now apparent head. Kick his ass for what he did to your girlfriend. Naruto yelled, she is not my girlfriend, while glaring at the smug toad perched atop his head. She's just my best friend who just so happened to be a girl. Right, keep telling yourself that, the toad muttered as he turned his focus back on Neji. Naruto hurriedly ran towards his Shikuho, disregarding the pain, but Neji blocked his way. Seeing this, Naruto went to throw a punch at Neji's face but was surprised when his fist met air. What the? Naruto questioned as he looked down to see Neji's smirk. As he stumbled over his own body, the older boy struck Naruto hard in the chest with his double palm. You cannot defeat fate, he said. The force of the blow caused the monk to fly the rest of the way to his Shikuho and crash into it. As he landed carelessly, Gamakichi was knocked off balance by the force of the landing and ended up sprawled out on the ground. It is over now. You really can't do much against me without chakra at this point. Striking at those points does more than denies you your chakra. They leave you in such a weakened state that fighting back is impossible. You being able to stand up right afterwards is worthy of being notable for a loser such as you. Glaring at him through the pain, Naruto couldn't help but feel his anger rise at what the boy said next. Just so you know, beating Lee doesn't necessarily mean that you can match me. I normally dominate him in our spars, so don't even bother stripping your clothes. It is your fate to lose here today. The monk snarled, struggling to stand and even grabbing hold of his staff, saying, Shut up, you bastard. No way in hell will I lose to you, and just so you know, it is possible to reopen the tenketsu. And how will you do that? The monk snarled, pure strength of will. While bringing his hands together, after saying that, he started to delve deeply within himself. He was looking for his chakra, thinking he could will it out if he could find a sliver. He knows he can, he did it before in the past with Hinata. Though she wasn't as skilled as boy before him. Growling in frustration, he knew that it was beginning to frustrate him until he felt it. That tiny glimmer of energy inside of him that he clung to like it was his lifeline. Grabbing hold of it, he began to drag it from his core, willing it through his body until all of his tenketsus were sudden opened and his chakra exploded from his body in a brilliant blue light that wrapped around his body. How is this possible? Naruto barely heard Neji say over the raging chakra that shrouded him. Once the flare of chakra settled back within his body, he looked at Neji and narrowed his eyes. Now I'm ready to end this. Just so you know, after what you did, I hope that you're ready for 1,000 years worth of pain. Let's give it to him, bro. He heard Gamakichi shout as he leapt back onto his shoulder. Let's show him that no one messes with family or friends. He growled, forcing himself to make a lunge towards his opponent. Yeah, he said. His body complained, probably from having to forcefully reopen his tenketsu and from exerting himself so much after pulling off such an amazing feat. It felt slightly sluggish, and it was because Neji was able to duck beneath the swing of his Shikuho. Just as the older boy prepared to strike back at Naruto's bare midsection, Gamakichi dove and gave Neji a kick to the head. Naruto went back to his perch and stepped back from the elder genin to give him some room. The boy was only mildly stunned by the blow, but it was stupid to charge at him at that point if that was how his body was going to react. Instead of just charging at him and giving him a hard time until he was happy again, he needed a better plan. Thus, in his state of mind, he did the only thing that truly occurred to him. He executed the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. A burst of smoke appeared, revealing 4 copies of himself. His friend hopped off his shoulder and back to the ground, allowing the boy to blend in better as he prepared to perform the jutsu. The boy knew that this was his best bet. Neji wouldn't be able to distinguish him from his copies, and with them swarming the older boy, he wouldn't be able to properly defend against it. As he and his copies neared Neji, he saw his confusion and nervousness. Obviously, from not being able to tell which is which and knowing that Naruto is indeed a skilled fighter if he was able to perform well early on. Naruto liked seeing that. To see the older and contemptible boy squirming was pleasing, however that was short-lived when both he and his copies smashed into a whirling barrier that shot forth out of Neji. He whirled through the air, landing unceremoniously back on his feet, and the copies vanished the way they had appeared. He saw the slight indentation in the ground as he looked at the boy, and knew at once what had happened. With his close ties to the Hyuga clan, the circumstances surrounding the incident were easily deduced. Because the boy, a member of the branch house, had just demonstrated a technique that is exclusively taught to the heir of the main house, he was fairly certain that the Hyuga who were in the stands were astounded by the display as well. Hakesho Kaden. Naruto shot a glare at Neji, growling, "When did you learn that?" He had a fairly good idea how, and didn't really hold him in contempt for doing so, since both his grandfather and cousin taught him that techniques are bound to be passed on without the notice of the practitioner someday. This was merely an illustration of it without the use of a Sharingan style Jujutsu. It did, however, make going up against Neji more difficult. The technique was for all intents and purposes a powerful defense. Despite the claims of many Hyuga and, most likely, Neji, it is not perfect in any sense of the word. He knew that such a feat uses a massive amount of chakra. Expelling that much and making it a solid whirling dome of protection would require it to be so. Though he didn't appear tired, Naruto could sense that he was posing and taking advantage of the fact that the ninja from multiple classes was giving him some time. This was a forced moment for Naruto because, unlike before, he couldn't just charge in. Instead, he had to add in this new variable to counter it as well. When the older boy slid into the traditional Hyuga Jukano stance, he could not help but notice the smirk on his face. The boy disregarded him and countered with, "That jutsu, what was it?" My Byakugan couldn't tell them apart. Given that the boy disregarded his question, he chose to do the same. In addition, revealing such a technique is crucial to suicide. Once a technique is revealed, it can be countered, just like he was preparing to do now that he knew Neji knew such a technique. He made 10 more copies of himself and they all flew towards Neji again, attacking from different directions. This time, when he got closer, he could still see the uncertainty on Neji's face, but he could also see the haughty grin right before the boy spun around and raised that domed barrier of his once more. While the real one spun through the air again and hit the ground hard, each copy crashed into the barrier and vanished in a puff of smoke. The older boy stood proudly where he had repelled the last attack, and all he could do was glare weakly at him. The genin said, emerging from the ground impression, as it was destined. I was to win. Fate had declared it so that I would win and that a loser like you would lose. Neji froze, asking herself, is that so? As the Naruto who was lying on the ground vanished in a puff of smoke. Naruto then displayed his technique, saying, let me show you a technique that Kakashi Sensei taught me. Konohagakure Hiden Taijutsu Oji. Senin Garashi. Neji was propelled into the air and held there for a considerable amount of time before coming down hard, face first, onto the earth. Before he could get up and at least soothe his stinging rump, Naruto shoved him back into the ground forcefully while stepping on his back. The monk noticed the familiar glance behind him and the intense anger in those light-colored eyes. But Naruto had him pinned and his shikuho raised to stab him in the stomach, so he was powerless to stop it. Neji had lost when the game was over. The referee declared Uzumaki Naruto the winner. After that beating, Naruto felt much better, so he released the boy and walked away. He delivered Neji the beating of a lifetime and 1,000 years' worth of agony, as promised. It was more than enough to avenge his best friend. He had to ask himself why he had gone to such lengths as he had in punishing Neji as he gathered his belongings in Gamakichi. He'll have to find out from his family later. His gaze strayed from the box where his family was seated to the bleachers as he exited the arena, searching for his best friend. He wondered if they were proud of him as his thoughts turned to them. That was, Ajari begun as he watched the older boy carried out of the arena. Most interesting. Leaning back, he then turned his attention to Karasu. What style of fighting was that Karasu? Don't know. I've never seen it before. There was no style, Taribo sneered with distaste from his seat. He was contemptuous of the entire match the entire time. He powered his way through the use of dishonorable tricks that the ninja are prone to use. And what was with that secret technique? It was nothing more than a kancho. The man showed no respect for the people in the village he was in, and Anko could hardly contain her annoyance. Disrespecting the way of life for a ninja in a ninja village was borderline suicidal. His life was assured though for being an elder and being a major political and religious figurehead in the elemental nations. To Anko's surprise, Hiruzen simply laughed at the statement before saying, he only used one jutsu throughout the entire fight. As before, though, Anko could still tell that he was frowning even though she couldn't see his face. Anko couldn't help but glance to the side where she saw Jado looking a little sheepish at the trip down memory lane. Though the Senengarashi is merely a joke that Tobarama Sensei once used on me when I was a young genin after someone else used it on them, she said. An old friend of both Hashirama Sama and Tobarama Sensei once used it on them during a spar. His name was, if I remember correctly, was Kuroki Kage. To the surprise of all, especially the younger ones there at the time, the Kage interrupted, saying, you mean the legendary warrior who each hidden village pays homage to by use of his name when the current age of ninja began. The Hokage just nodded, but as a Kage, he had to know something about it. Why yes of course, the very same, Hiruzen replied, rapidly getting over his initial shock. Though when Kage used it, he shouted Kancho. When Tobarama Sensei used it back in the day, he made the name more elaborate and I passed it on to my students. For some odd reason, Anko noticed the Kage nod his head. It's become more or less running gag over the years. Regardless, Karasu finally said, interrupting the current conversation. Naruto.kun performed marvelously, though I'm not sure how he would be graded for his performance however. The Hokage appeared reflective for a short while, as if mentally reliving the fight. Well, he didn't show much but showed restraint in the use of his techniques and much skill. I was honestly not expecting him to have both a toad and that little blue companion his has hidden on him. It's a bit early to properly judge, but he did show decent planning during the fight despite his aggressive stance early on. The Kage seemed reluctant in giving his own piece. He is indeed quite skilled, making the fight completely one-sided until Hyuga Neji managed to land that combo and cripple the boy from just that one opening that he himself was very fortunate to have gotten. Until he managed to reopen his Tenketsu, he was outmatched and then it balanced it. I will reserve judgment on his promotion Hokage. Dono, but he did show some tactical sense during the fight. His early usage of Kage Bunshin was interesting with how he managed to counter the fabled Hyuga Hakesho Kaden. He did, nodding. Hiruzen said. Most of it happened in the end though. Early on what he displayed was for show when he didn't really need it. He needed to use some tactics to overcome his opponent once they were on a more even playing field. He then got up. He does have more chances to show whether or not he is worthy of promotion. Ajari leaned back in his chair and said, so you break down each and every fight and take note of what each and every participant did while putting on a show for the public. That is pretty much how things go, but we aren't the only ones judging, there are other officials as well. They are around in the stands and it is with their feedback that we properly judge who is worthy and who isn't. Hiruzen continued to lean toward Ajari. It is with this that the results to see who is worthy of promotion is normally seen the day after the tournament. The tournament is merely for show to showcase our young and upcoming ninja to various potential clients. With that in mind, with a better performance from one village over another, you will hinder them economically while showing that you have big sticks and know how to use them to others who may wish to strike at you. From her position at the Hokage's side, she could see Ajari casting the Kage sidelong glance. So how would the absence of Uchiha Sasuke be seen then by others? Speaking of which, where is the boy? The Kage asked. The crowd is growing quite restless. There is little doubt that this next match is one that they'd enjoy the most in seeing. Especially me, I'd like to see him fight Maigara. But before he could respond, the Hokage sighed, and Rado knelt beside him. Sir, there has been no word about the boy. The Kunoichi could clearly hear the scarred Jonin whisper. The others could possibly as well, but gave the two the privacy that master and servant deserved out in public. Perhaps before the crowd begins to make a fuss we should disqualify him. The elderly commander nodded in agreement to what his bodyguard had said. He has not appeared at the designated time that the tournament began and he has still not appeared before his own designated match. So as per the guidelines laid down by the Chunin Selection Exam Charter, Uchiha Sasuke will be disqualified. The Kage formally begged, Hokage Dono, please wait a little bit longer before making that decision. The majority of leaders here today are mainly here to see the boy compete. He is of the Uchiha clan, and those of us from K's no Kuni would like to request that our own Gaara be given the opportunity to fight him. As the Cage spoke, Anko couldn't help but feel the weight of what he was saying and could only imagine the strain it put on the Hokage. This was nothing more than an outright challenge to the authority of Konohagakure no Sato, the core of Hai no Kuni's military, which he leads. But it was also a move against the rules of the charter, which were written down at the sacrifice of countless men and women. To do such a thing would be a spit in the face of each person who died for this system. Hiruzen carefully and calmly responded, "You seem to be awfully concerned to have this match Cage. Dono, understanding the gravity of what was happening. There is no better opponent than Uchiha to show off the quality of my village's ninja to these clients." The fellow Cage returned as he focused on the arena below. "It is a great opportunity for us." Glaring at the Cage, Tarobo growled, "The insolent hatchling isn't here. By all rights, by the silly rules you ninja wrote, the boy is to be disqualified." The displeased elder's remarks appeared to have hurt the Cage for some strange reason, according to Anko. If he is to be disqualified, then he is to be disqualified. No exceptions are to be made for him just because of his bloodline. That is indeed true. If any other would be disqualified, then he is to be disqualified as well, Ajari stated. Karasu continued, "If my grandson was to not appear, then he'd be disqualified as well," to which the other two elders somewhat grudgingly agreed. "I'm sure that seeing that the brat hasn't appeared yet would put off the crowd as well, so he should be punished accordingly." It was then that Jado decided to add his own thoughts to the conversation. "The bastard has been given ample time to arrive. And then he had until the end of the first match to appear. His time is up. By all rights the bastard is to be disqualified, regardless of lineage." At the end of this, Anko couldn't help but notice the dark smirk that crossed the Mon's face before he seemed to share a look with the Hokage, who had his own hidden smirk that she couldn't see. To the dismay of the Cage, Hiruzen declared, "They are right, Cage. Dono, Uchiha Sasuke is hereby disqualified," before sending Rado down to the arena to tell Genma of the outcome. Gaara was pronounced the winner and would take on Naruto in the following round after this was called. Nevertheless, 3 more matches had to be played before that one could be viewed. She was unaware of her Hokage's satisfaction as she watched the two Kunoichi, Kuno Tenten and Haruno Sakura, enter the arena. He won't allow any of his ninja to injure one of his teammates. It was finally time to humble the boy, he decided.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.